So, welcome everybody to this Friday's episode of Author Reads here on Faye Productions. I am your host, Fairy Princess Lily, and I'm here today with a New York Times best-selling author, Jody Lynn Nye, who is a sci-fi fantasy author. Hello, say hello to the crowd, Jody.
Hello, friends. Nice to be here with you.
Yes, so tell us a little bit about yourself and your writing, like what you do and about you. Where are you from, and what is your circuit? Tell us.
Well, I'm a Chicago native, and I lived there pretty much all of my life, except for traveling until December when we moved to the Atlanta area because we were getting fed up with the winters. So it was time to go, and we found this to be much more amenable right up until the middle of this week when the air conditioning went out,
Oh
as
no.
it might. Oh yes, yeah, we're waiting for the nice man to arrive with some new whatever they're using instead of Freon these days. I am a writer of science fiction and fantasy. I have been self employed or self unemployed, as my husband calls it, since 1985. I've written over 50 books, some in collaboration, many licensed products, but quite a few by myself, and over 170 short stories. Just turned another one in, and I'm very pleased that that was just accepted. I've written a couple of comic scripts under the aegis of a lovely man called Jack Holder for Arcane Industries, and have tried many things. I My previous job just before I quit to go freelance was, believe it or not, as the technical operations manager for a television station in Chicago. But I went freelance and have never looked back.
Wow. Well, you obviously are doing very good at your self-unemployment if you've been doing it since 1985. And you clearly haven't starved yet, so you must be on a roll. I'm curious, what got you started in sci-fi? And I saw a little thing in one of your bios about Dragon Con, and I'm wondering if you could maybe speak to that a little bit for all of us
Well,
geeky nerds.
first, science fiction almost didn't happen. I asked my teachers, since I used to hang out with the teachers as much as anybody in my schools, what is this thing called science fiction? And they said, oh, here are some books you should read. And at the time, they were all Vonnegut and Bradbury and all sorts of post-apocalyptic stuff that was very, very grim indeed, and including one in the Martian Chronicles by Bradbury that blew up the Earth. And I live here, so I was not too happy about that. So I said I'm not going to read any more science fiction, but I commonly read everything that was in our school library, and just decided I would read fantasy instead. I read history, I read biographies, I read practically anything else. And I came across a book called The Crystal Griffin. Now, knowing that what a griffin was, part eagle and part lion, I thought, okay, this can't go wrong. Well, Andre fooled me. It was, in fact, science fiction. It ended with a science fiction introduction to her Witch World series. So I realized that I had been had, but it was a good way, and Andre became sort of my safe place to go. If I read something really daring and really scary, I would go back and find another Andre Norton book, which was not hard since she wrote over 100 books, I think around 135. So there was plenty to
Prolific.
enjoy. Incredibly, incredibly. She finished her last book not far off her 93rd birthday. Actually, it was published right around the time she was 93. She died at 93 and 1 month. And
Oh, wow.
I feel very fortunate that I was able to tell her exactly what she had done for me, saving me for science fiction, and we were friends into her later years. So I was proud of that. Dragon Con, if you have never experienced it, calls itself
I have not.
oh my
Dragon Con and Gen
well.
Con, I've never been to them, although because I've been around the convention circuit myself for a very long time, and so
Hmm.
I know many, many people who have done one and or both. And so,
Yes,
anyway,
it's massive. It has been around 80,000 people for the last several years. And the sort of nickname for it is Mardi Gras for nerds, because there is just about anything that you can think of. There's goths, and there's paranormal romance. There's plain old traditional science fiction and fantasy. So many different other wonderful things that you can enjoy. There's even a puppeteering track, and they had quite a few of the
Wow.
Henson Associate
Yes.
Muppeteers visit. And I teach the 2-day writing workshop there. Have been this will be year 10.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
Wow. So what does that entail?
well, it's a limited workshop of 20 people, and we all get together a day before the convention opens, and we run a day into the con, so Thursday and Friday. They submit manuscripts ahead of time, and we workshop all of them. I write a personal critique for each person, and I have had some incredibly talented, prolific people in the group, and I look forward to seeing many of them published in the future.
So that actually sounds really, really like an amazing thing to participate in. I'm curious, have you ever been on? Oh, I have a thing in my eye. I'm sorry. Have you ever been on the other side of that table, of that author table, where you are submitting something at a convention for a critique to another author, an established author?
Not in years. I have, of course, had things read over by mostly professional editors, and yes, it's hard to be in the hot seat. So I try to be gentle. I try to be gentle but thorough, like the laxative that they advertise on television. There is you want to tell them the things they need to know. It does no good to give them just pats on the head and say, yes, that was wonderful. Everything you did is wonderful, because it's not going to help them progress. But also, it's not fair to cut their fingers off in front of their faces and say, you are terrible. You should go and collect garbage for a living. There is a happy medium, and it goes along with respect. You respect their efforts, their talent, and you say, this is my perception, and it's only my opinion, because your mileage may vary. So I want them to understand that I'm giving them my perspective as someone who has written a lot, someone who has read a lot, and someone who has edited a fair bit.
I'm curious, now that we're talking about this, what do you think the most critical and the most bolstering advice you've ever received in the course of your career is? The things that stood out as just something that was like just crushing, and then something that just made you soar.
Oh, I had someone tell me, for the part that made me soar, was somebody who said, I started reading your books when I was a kid. Of course, there
Wow.
was a little bit of crushing in there too, but
No,
if
because
you're
what
going
does
if you're going
Shakespeare
to
say about
survive,
that?
yes, if you're going to survive. And she said, one of your books was my favorite when I was growing up, and I thought that was wonderful. And she said, because of you, I wanted to become an author. And she has become a successful author, and I'm proud of her. I'm proud if I had any little thing to do with her success. As for crushing, I had somebody that I thought knew better tell me something very negative about one of my books, which I will not repeat. It was hard enough to hear the first time, and it was tactless. I realized that, but it didn't mean he wasn't thinking it. So yes, there have been crushing moments as well as good ones, but I can live for weeks on a good compliment.
It sounds like just your whole range of experiences has shaped how you then approach others with something of
Oh
a
yes.
trying to have a kind hand,
Mm-hmm.
firm but kind, if you to quote Julie Andrews, right? Uh,
Just to be kind. Yes.
um, well, so today, what have you brought today to read for us? I am curious
Well, I put
of
together.
your huge repertoire of work.
I love cats, as you do. We were talking a little bit before the show,
Yes.
and
Yes.
I write a lot of stories that have something to do with cats. So I put together a collection that is called Cats Triumphant, and the cover was on display before the show started. A wonderful painting by David Cherry. So I'm very proud of that. And I put together a number of my cat stories for a story bundle that I have since set out to publish independently, since it's a popular topic. And this is one of the stories
Yes.
that is in it and that I have often read at conventions. I enjoy it because I love doing readings. I get to do all the voices and try not to laugh at my own jokes. That's odious.
Actually, I think it's kind of adorable that you laugh at your own jokes because I like to laugh at my own jokes too. Sometimes I'm the only one and that laughs at my own jokes. So, I'm like, oh, I'm not the only person that does that. That makes me
No,
feel
no,
good
not at
and
all.
heartwarmed.
Not at all. Sometimes
Uh,
when I know that I've written, I write a lot of humor, so I know that if it makes me giggle, that I hope it will make the audience giggle too. And I am not above writing something in that's so subtle that only I know it's there. But every so often, someone will say, "You put this in here," and I saw it, and I'm really pleased that they actually noticed it.
oh,
Oh,
and speaking of
welcome,
cats,
Kitty.
yes,
Which one's
this
this?
is well, her name is Geo, but we actually call her Silky because she's very silky,
Oh,
and you can't ever call a cat by its actual name, as you know. They must all have
mm-hmm.
20 nicknames, but her main nickname
Yes.
is Silky.
Oh,
So
pretty
she's
kitty.
our little yeah, we found her actually in North Dakota when we were traveling last
Oh
year
my.
from the Big Apple all the way back to the Emerald City, and we drove all the way across in the Land Dragon, and in North Dakota, we found a kitten. She was starving outside in the freezing
Oh
weather,
God.
and she weighed 1.5 pounds by the time we got her, 3 days later when we got her back. So, yeah, so we saved her, and now she's our crazy little kitty.
Oh,
So
poor
she's
little Dot.
parkour.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but she is doing very well. So, yeah, so I want to say really quick to everybody in the audience, of course, please hit the like and subscribe button, and you will see Jody's information that's going in the ticker here before she just starts a reading for us. We will be having a giveaway today of one of her books, although we're going to leave the title of that book as a surprise till the end. So if you are here, then be prepared to enter to win. We will be doing the drawing live, and Jody, I will turn it over to you. I'm going to put
Okay.
myself on mute. But for those of you in the audience, I will also be in the audience with you watching. And if you guys have questions or anything you'd like me to ask her, then when she's done reading, we will take questions from the audience. So with that, I shall give you the screen, my lady.
Thank you, my dear. Very well. Superstition. The long black cat with the green eyes watched carefully as the middle-aged woman in the green suit strolled purposefully toward the footbridge. 3, 2, 1, now! Stitch dashed out of his hiding place and rushed across the woman's path. She recoiled. Eee! A black cat! She stopped walking and looked around to see if anyone had observed her. Stitch sat down on the end of the footbridge and looked at her. Nervously, she backed away and went looking for another way across the canal. Stitch waited for a while, then went back to his comfortable burrow. He glanced up at the clock tower sticking up above the low buildings on the water's edge. Almost 8 o'clock. Where was Murphy? Hey, kitty cat, the burly, dark-skinned man said, driving up in the pickup. Gotta finish that bridge today. You gonna come and watch me some more? He gawked. Hey, what happened to the warning sign? Gotta be those damned kids. Good thing no one's walked on it. They'd have fallen right into the canal. Stitch squeezed his eyes as Murphy got out of the truck and fondled his ears. Come on and talk to me while I work. I got tuna for lunch. Murphy did a good job on the bridge. Stitch stuck around to make sure he remembered about the cleats, holding up the bracers at the far end too, and sauntered away. The tuna was good too. Rossburg was a great place to live in Stitch's opinion. The town was growing, but not too fast. The mayor was one of those intelligent progress guys, or so he claimed, according to the accounts of the newspaper Stitch used for padding in one of his many outdoor accommodations. Prosperity for all was one of his mottos. Make everyone happy, get everyone involved in helping to make their lives better, respond to problems before they became problems, and no one would feel the need to commit antisocial behavior. At least that was the theory. So far, Rossburg didn't have the gang problem that a lot of neighboring cities did, but it was coming. Stish could feel it. Still, the mayor's plan was working. He had a lot of community grassroots support, and Stish was doing his part. A rising tide lifted all boats, and where people didn't feel like trapped rats, there was a lot less animal cruelty going around. To do his share, he had to use the tools available to him as a civic-minded feline American citizen. Nearly noon, he noted, observing the clock on the brick tower of what had been a shoe factory and was now a nice mall with shops. Got to get on to his next appointment. He strolled across the park. A couple of teenagers were eating lunch on a picnic cloth. He came by to catch a morsel or two and recognized the chief of police's daughter, Marietta Garcia. "Hi, Shadow," she said, reaching out to pet him. He allowed the caress in exchange for a small piece of cheese. "Justin, this is Shadow," she told the boy with her. "That's what I call him. I don't know who he belongs to." She was a nice girl, but not too wise. Justin was a troublemaker. He and a bunch of his friends had been sounded out by gangbangers from out of town, and they were weak enough to get interested in the talk of money and power. Stish had hurled the whole thing from inside a ventilation duct in the abandoned building where the boys hung out. They'd thrown stones at him, and he had not forgotten it. Their eyes met, and Stish puffed up and showed his fangs. "Oh!" Marietta exclaimed. Stish thought he'd better throw a little more emphasis on getting her out of that park before her father saw them. He backed away from the boy. Though he regretted what it would shortly do to the piece of cheese he had just consumed, he began to eat grass. "That means it's going to rain," Marietta told her beau. "When a cat eats grass, it's a sign of rain. We'd better go." "Baby, we just got here," Justin protested, putting an arm around her shoulders and pulling her close. "We were going to get real cozy, remember?" Marietta blushed and looked at Stish, who was vigorously tearing up the turf. "Come on, Marietta," he thought. He knew she never stepped on cracks, and she had a 4-leaf clover in a locket. She jerked away. "No, I better go. I just got my hair done. Here, you can take the rest of the sandwiches, all right?" The boy, who clearly had more appetite for what was sitting across from him than what was in the basket, got up and stalked away. Marietta looked after him in dismay. She was too young to be out with boys, Stish thought. Her dad was right. Stish waited around for her and escorted her out of the woods. As soon as he saw her on her way, he was sick in the gutter. Looking after Marietta made him late for his appointment, but he thought it was worth it. When he got to the assisted living center, a heavy-set woman, the manager of the group home, was looking out the door. "There you are, baby. I was wondering when you'd get here. Mrs. Latrobe's been waiting for you. You are just the best therapy animal we ever had, and I don't know who trained you." She picked him up and slung him over her shoulder. Stish burbled a little and worked his paws as she carried him down the hallway. Her soft flesh was nice to snuggle up with. If he had ever decided to go tame and pick a home, Mrs. Jones was first on his list of potential roommates. "Mrs. Latrobe, honey, here's Puffkin," she announced as she plopped Stish into the narrow lap of a nearly blind old woman wearing a pink bathrobe and a wheelchair. The clawed hands felt their way along his sides. Stish tucked up his paws and let out the loudest purr he could. The toothless mouth grinned widely. An hour later, he was on his way to the Salvation Army soup kitchen in the middle section of the old section of town. He liked to patrol the long, narrow building for rats before they opened the glass doors for dinner in the evening. Colonel Stan Kozlowski welcomed him with a sharp salute. "Scout, good to see you," the tall, thin man exclaimed. "Patrol the premises, then report for prayer services promptly at 17:30 hours. Rations will follow." "Meow," Stish replied, sitting down and wrapping his long, thin tail smartly around his legs. It was as close to "yes, sir," and a salute as he could muster, and it pleased Colonel Kozlowski. Stish could have done without the prayer session, though. He respected the Army, but he didn't appreciate any belief system that placed him among the lower animals ruled by man. That wasn't the way things really were. After a few hallelujahs and a dish of pretty decent beef stew, Stish made a farewell swipe against Colonel Kozlowski's trouser stripe and headed out the door. 2 dead rats were in the dumpster behind the old building. Stish had hissed a warning at the other 9 he could hear in the walls, but couldn't reach, yet. Sooner or later he'd catch them out. Night had fallen, leaving Stish with a handful of pools of lamplight between him and his early evening hangout with his cat friends behind the stay-a-while bar and grill. He'd been courting a calico lady named Lurleen for the last few evenings. He and the other males could tell she was ready to go into estrus, and no one wanted to miss it. Stish might have to rip a few ears to get her exclusive attention. He licked his whiskers to clear away the last of the gravy as he trotted along the edge of the light against the darkened faces of the old shops. "There he is," a harsh voice hissed. "Get him!" Stish turned and stared. Shapes poured out of a parked car across the street from the mission. Who were they after? Not Colonel Kozlowski. Could it be Mr. Janos, who kept swearing he was going to give up his gambling habit? His eyes went wide as he realized the shapes were coming after him. He didn't hesitate. As the bulky shadows headed toward him, he turned and streaked down the street, looking for a low hole into which he could duck. Murphy had just repaired and sealed the broken standpipe at the end of the street. That was out. How about the car wash? No, they had started closing early in the autumn. How about the open window on the front of the pizza shop around the corner? Stitch raced the much slower humans to the intersection, then ducked rightward, hoping to lose them. Pie Time had a big crowd around it, including Chief Garcia. The compact police officer was showing photographs to the people waiting to be seated. If you see any suspicious vehicles, he was saying, or you remember any details, call this number. It's important. He looked serious and worried. There was nothing of the usual genial senior city official about him. Stish couldn't jump into the restaurant looking for shelter, or the employees would get cited for health codes. The cat dropped to a walk and sauntered among the people, casually rubbing a knee here and there. He glanced behind him. His pursuers rounded the corner. He got a good look. 3 of them were strangers, adult males in their 30s, but the other 5 were teenagers, known troublemakers, including Marietta's unsuccessful suitor. Their eyes gleamed when they saw Stish, but one noticed the cops and pulled on the other's sleeves to warn them. They turned and ducked back out of sight. Stish stayed among the group as long as he could before someone decided it wasn't sanitary to have a cat even on the outside of a restaurant and shoot him away. Reluctantly, Stish slipped off, keeping an eye out. He had a bad feeling about those humans, who was growing stronger all the time. He left the street and ducked into the nearest alley. The moment he did, rough hands grabbed him. Stish let out a war cry that would have every tomcat in Rossburg on the run and started lashing out with every claw. His captor swore. "Come on, man, help me," he said. 2 of the teenagers who moved in from the shadows. Stish kicked and scratched at all of them, still yowling fiercely. He got a good swipe down the face of the one who had picked him up. The man let go to clap a hand to his cheek, but the other 2 got a hold of Stish's legs and tried to hang on. Stish twisted. He raked a claw across the first one's wrist and rabbit-kicked the other in the neck. He knew he had drawn blood. "Ow, goddammit! Dios mito! This little puta!" One of the men, a swarthy man with sleek black hair, laughed. In no hurry. He swept off his black leather jacket and swept it down over Stish. The cat fought valiantly to free himself, but the man wrapped him up like a burrito. Stish started growling. "Listen to him," the man said. "I like one with spirit." "I'll give him spirit," Stish thought. He kept the warbles and snarls up all the way to their destination. After being carried for blocks on foot, Stish was dumped out of the confines of the jacket into an upended carrier cage that was snapped shut behind him. These people were prepared, Stish thought despairingly, and they knew how to handle cats. Was he going to be used as bait for fighting dogs? The cage was turned right side down. Stish started throwing himself against the door. Sometimes one could get those plastic cages unlatched by main strength. He meant to try. "This is so you can see him while we make the other preparations," the swarthy man said. "Now hurry up. The moon is full at midnight." Stish heard the last word with dismay. He supposed it wasn't any use, thinking this guy was a member of the nature priests, not with the furnishings he was hauling out of a shiny leather suitcase. They had taken over the break room of one of the local stores, white-painted cinder block walls and brown-topped formica tables surrounded by brown plastic chairs. The chairs were folded up, all but one of them, in which the first man sat while he instructed the 5 boys in hanging up a goat's skull, a poster with a pair of gleaming, slitted red eyes on it, and a red cloth banner with an upside-down pentacle painted on it in blood. More goat, Stish decided, after a sniff through the bars of his prison. The suitcase also contained a brass bowl, a dozen brass candlesticks, and several ugly-looking daggers, all of which were placed on one of the formica tables. Another table was placed in the center of the room, facing the goat skull. "No!" a girl's voice screamed. Stish's ears perked up. It was Marietta. The back door banged open, and the other 2 men came in, hauling the teenager by her wrists. The boys all stared. "What are you going to do with her?" Justin squeaked, his voice forgetting it had dropped months ago. The first man leered. "You gotta have an altar. It's gotta be a virgin. You're a virgin, aren't you, cutie?" "Good," said the first man. "Prepare her." "What?" the boys asked. "Forget it." He nodded sharply to the other 2 men. They dragged her across the open table on her back. One of them held her arm flat to the table with one hand, while the first man pulled long black strips of cloth out of the capacious suitcase. He tied Marietta's wrists and ankles down until she was spread-eagled on the table. "And since it don't do honor to the devil not to show him what he brought him," he whipped a knife out of his pocket and slit her clothes up the front. He pulled the tatters off her body and left her naked. The boys gawked at her thin little body, the small round breasts torn between interest and shame. "Let me go," Marietta screamed. "This is wrong. It's wrong. Jesus wouldn't." The man shook his head and stuffed the remains of her bra in her mouth. "You can decide what to do with the virgin later on," he said, lowering his eyelids suggestively. But even Justin looked sick at the thought. Stitch realized there was little chance that either he or the girl would leave that room alive. He had to do something fancy to save Marietta and himself. "Oh, come on, Luis," one of the boys said. The man smacked him in the face with the back of his hand. "You call me master. You get it, Ronaldo? The rest of you, too. Now pay attention." The men arranged candlesticks at the corners of the room, on the table underneath the goat skull, and in between Marietta's legs and arms. They put black candles into each one and set a bucket-sized cauldron on the floor. It stank of cat blood. Stitch growled under his breath. Then they shrugged into black robes. The master handed each boy a robe. "Put 'em on." When they protested, he showed them the knife. "Put 'em on. You want to be part of Satan's chosen, you have to swear before him, and he don't take no disciples who don't show him honor. Got that?" So this was an elaborate gang induction, one with enough trappings and fearsome rituals that the boys would be reluctant to back away from it. Stitch sniffed the air. He knew where he was within a few buildings. The scent of slightly burned beef stew was on the air. He couldn't be far from the Salvation Army mission. Colonel Kozlowski and his people would be scouring the area for those who needed their help that night. Could he attract their attention? He had to wait for the right moment or risk becoming a hasty sacrifice. The boys donned their robes over their blue jeans and rock t-shirts, shooting looks at one another to see if any of them was willing to admit that they looked ridiculous. They were too scared. Marietta was struggling against her bonds, but she was too afraid to make much of a fuss. Her eyes met Justin's, and he looked away. Stitch hoped that meant there was a flicker of decency left in the boy. A noise came from outside, the sound of someone walking. Stitch set up a screech that sounded like a cross between a crying baby and a tortured soul. One of the men flattened himself against the inside wall next to the door and looked out, a gun suddenly appearing in his hand. The master came and shook Stitch's cage until he stopped yowling. "Shut up, you," he snarled, shoving his face down into the grill. Stitch took a swipe at him. He ducked back, easily avoiding the paw full of needles. "You'll be out of there soon, I swear." The second man near the door peered out and nodded to the leader. The master turned back to the boys. "Form a circle around the altar, now!" The boys shuffled into place. A couple of them were starting to get interested in the proceedings. When the third man lit a big black candle and handed it to the first boy in line, he looked avidly around for others to light from it. As soon as all of the tapers were blazing, they shut off the lights. With the flickering flames making the goat skill look as though it were moving, and the writhing girl on the altar table, the room had been rendered suitably spooky. The three men began to chant nonsense words that sounded impressive in the dark room. "Homina hominum bedianum polianum sentinus meliantum." Stitch heard some more noises behind the building. He had little to lose now. He let out a caterwaul that went up and down the scales. "God damn it, make him shut up," the master commanded. "We have the sacrifice now," the second man suggested. "That's not the way of Satan's chosen," the master barked. "You boys, first you repeat after me. I solemnly swear by my immortal soul that I will serve Satan with all my body, heart, and soul." Eyes glinting in the firelight, the boys followed the litany, which began to detail horrible punishments, both in this world and the next, if they ever betrayed Satan, the master of the chosen, his assistants, or any member of the group, to anyone as long as they lived on earth. Bright tears dripping down Marietta's face caught the light, but none of the boys were paying attention to her now. She had gone limp with hopelessness. "By my immortal soul I swear, which will be forfeit if I defy any of my promises to Satan himself." The master concluded the oath with his arms in the air, holding a dagger between his hands. The boys repeated his words, staring at the gleaming knife with interest. "Bring the sacrifice. It has to be a pure black animal," he explained. "No other color is considered fit. You remember that, and no end to the rewards you will get." The second robed man came for the cage. Stitch had been bunched at the end of the container, his muscles tensed for just that moment. The second the door was opened, Stitch bounded out, using the man's shoulder for leverage, and hurtled into the room. "Catch him!" the man shouted. Stitch led them all on a chase around the room. He hoped he could make one of them set his robe on fire, but no such luck. With a leap, he landed feather-light on Marietta's bare belly and settled into a compact bundle just under her rib cage. It was heaving with fear. He let out a huge purr to try to reassure her, and turned the green lamps of his eyes at the master, who was coming at him with the knife. "So he lands right where he ought to be," the master said. "Dumb cat don't know his own fate." He reached for Stish's scruff. Stish evaded him. The noises outside were getting more distinct, and he definitely heard car tires crunching very quietly over the broken concrete and glass in the alley. As the master was about to order his acolytes to hold the cat still, Stish rose to his feet and dipped his head and forelegs in an elaborate bow. The man backpedaled a little. "He's bewitched," one of the boys murmured. The master was quick to take him up on it. "That's right. The power of Satan has taken the soul of the black cat. He's a good sacrifice. His blood will bring you much power." But Stish wasn't finished. He leaped lightly off Marietta and onto the floor. He approached the ram's skull. Stopping before it, he sketched another deep bow, lowering his head and forelegs all the way to the floor. The master couldn't help but gape. Stish knew he had never seen anything like it. His previous sacrifices had never had a chance to help themselves, and the human must be beginning to wonder if he had stumbled onto something really supernatural. The fact that he had not grabbed the cat again and cut his throat meant he was too afraid to mess with forces beyond his comprehension. He had no choice but to let Stish do whatever he wanted. Stish moved on to the candle in the corner anti-clockwise from the skull and made another obeisance to it. Clockwise was for doing good magic. The opposite was for unmaking. Stish firmly intended that if there was any power beyond him, he was going to unmake the influence of these evil men. "Hurry up, let's cut him. I want a drink," the third man complained. "Shut up," the master commanded, his eyes pinned to Stish's slender back. "Watch him." Stish went from corner to corner bowing. When he got back to the skull, the men managed to catch him again. He eluded their grabs, checking with an ear to make sure that the outside noises were getting closer. He slipped past the master to bow to the skull again. Then he rose to his hind feet and started to dance. He had seen enough human dancing to know that ballet came as close as anything to the way cats move. But that would be too subtle for these characters. He stood on his toes and hopped in a circle, stretching its body to its full length with his forelegs high over his head. Stish danced over to the master and hopped all the way around him, then glared at him with slitted eyes as if chiding him for not joining in. The man was just as superstitious as he had surmised. When he began another counterclockwise circuit around the altar, the man followed him with his arms in the air, hopping in a circle. "You too," he ordered the others. The boys obeyed. The other two men looked skeptical, but even they were impressed by a possessed cat. Every time they passed the skull, Stish let out a throaty howl. The master and boys echoed it full-bellied, the men less enthusiastically, until the room was full of howls and shrieks. It was so noisy, in fact, that none of them heard it when the first officer broke the catch of the door and barreled into the room with his spotlight on his machine gun leveled on the robed leader. "Hands in the air!" he bellowed. "Oh, they already are." Chief Garcia kept one arm around his daughter's shoulders as he gave orders to the combined squad and SWAT team as they cleaned up the storeroom and bagged all of the evidence. Marietta was wrapped up in paramedic greens and a mylar blanket. "I'm not going to pretend that this will keep the gangs out forever," he explained to the smartly dressed female reporter who stood at his side with a tape recorder under his nose. "But we stopped the Satan's Chosen gang from getting a foothold tonight. These boys are going to have to spend some time in a program, but I hope we can keep them from getting involved in another gang. Don't forget about all those candles," he ordered, "and someone catch that cat. He's going to have to go to animal control. There's something wrong with him." Stish, who had been sitting placidly on one of the tables, arched his back in annoyance. Was that all the thanks that he got for the performance of the decade? He helped stop the gang, single-paw-edly. "No, Papa," Marietta protested, pulling his arm. "That's Shadow. He saved my life. You can't send him away." "Well, we call him Scout," Colonel Kozlowski said. "He comes by our mission every day. We rely on him, Chief. There's nothing wrong with him. He's the smartest cat I ever saw. I know his meows anywhere. If it wasn't for him setting up a racket, I would have never heard them in this building. It's closed after 4. That's when I called you and you set up this operation. He's the reason you caught those criminals." The reporter turned her attention to him. Stish preened. Now that was the kind of recognition he was talking about. "Well, we can't let a stray cat go on running around this town without a license," Garcia said firmly. "We're trying to make this a good community, you know." "I'll adopt him if that's all it takes, sir," Kozlowski offered. "I will, no problem," another officer said. "I think that's Puffkin. He comes to visit my grandmother in the nursing home every afternoon." "It sounds like he's a guardian angel to this whole community," the reporter said with a little smile. "That'll make good headlines, Chief. Can I get a photograph of you and the cat that saved your daughter's life?" She signed to the cameraman, who moved in with his apparatus on his shoulder. Stish knew a good photo op when he saw one. He sauntered up to the police chief and rubbed his cheek and his arched back against the man's uniform leg. The chief looked down at him and shivered a bit. Stish could see he was afraid. He rolled on his back and stretched out his paws invitingly, showing his belly and neck. Oh, come on, Papa, Marietta said, grinning. You're not superstitious or anything, are you? At last the chief bent down and petted Stitch's long side. No, I am not. Once in a while. It's a good thing when a black cat crosses your path. Superstition purred. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. It's in Cats Triumphant, one of my many short stories.
Yes.
Yes, I can.
Can you hear me? Oh, perfect. Okay. I got a little notification there saying that my browser had lost connection to my microphone, and I thought, oh no, what is happening? Yes, thank you so much. That was a great story. Woo, that was a whirlwind, to be perfectly honest. So you had some wonderful comments from some folks in the comment section. One of them was they really thought that they really liked how you called the cat. Everybody had a different name for the cat. I felt like there was some mix of T.S. Eliot there and some Puss in Boots with the cat dancing around. What was the inspiration for this story, if I may?
I'm not sure what made it him rescuing a girl from a bunch of gangbangers, but my husband once had a cat who was named Rat Cat. That's because when he adopted this, what would grow to be a huge, fluffy white cat, he was very tiny. You know, you could hold him in both hands, and he sort of looked like a white rat. But he lived up to his name. He lived up to the name of being a bratty cat. But at one point in his life, after Bill had him and he went on to another owner, he would go out door to door, cadging from all the neighbors one at a time. You know, he would, despite the fact that he was a large, very well-groomed boy, he managed to convince quite a lot of neighbors that he was a poor, hungry, forlorn waif.
Oh,
so I think that kind of inspired.
Oh my goodness. It's funny that you say that though, because we have cats that come around here that are very clearly well fed and owned, but they like to come around because of my cats. And then after they come around a couple times, I think just that to myself, oh no, is this cat not being taken care of? Does it need to have food? Does it need a new home? So, I have not actually acquired any cats. Yes. Yes, I'm so starving. Yes, I see that collar on your neck.
Another step.
Yeah. Very pitiful. Let's see. So you have a Carol Geisender. I'm sorry if I'm saying it wrong, Carol.
Yeah.
Yes, she says her black cat freaks out when she does a dance class in the living room. Do you think perhaps that she is trying to keep her from casting a spell?
You never know. Cats can see things we can't. There's a One Frame B. Clyban cartoon that has always been one of my favorites. Of just cats can see things we can't. That's cats staring off into space and the humans wondering, what is he looking at?
It's true. I think that they also have the power to go into the fourth dimension, because I've had more than one cat that magically gets outside when I am sure that no door or window has been opened, or vice versa. If I have left it outside and then I come home and it greets me inside the door.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure they have a magic power in there somewhere. I find it kind of funny that you used a black cat to undo the evil magic, when one of the associations of black cats is so much the other way around, that they are used, they're evil somehow. So poor black kitties.
That's actually kind of an American thing. In many cultures, a white cat is considered unlucky.
Oh, do you know why that is?
No, I don't. I suppose that in several cultures, white is the color of death. So maybe that's it. And cats are mysterious. Their eyes glow in the dark, or collect what light there is and gleam when you least expect to see it. And they move in mysterious ways. There's no question about that.
That is definitely true. Was it Douglas Adams that did the thing about the cat and the piece of toast with the butter tied to each other?
Yes, yeah, that was the
Like,
eternal flipping.
yes,
That's
the
right.
eternal flipping to power the universe or something.
That's right. Because otherwise, bread is not going to fall, or toast is not going to fall butter side down. And cats always land on their feet, so you can cause them to rotate forever and ever if you do that. So one of the things that I love, many people are familiar with Terry Pratchett's Discworld, but there's also a book that he did with Gray Joliffe's illustrations called The Unadulterated Cat, which is full of great observations about cat, including how they sometimes arrange themselves in a room where they can see every other cat
Mm.
and and they try to get to the best vantage point where they can't be leaped on by any of the other cats, and he calls it cat chess. So my three are
Cat.
always practicing cat chess.
I I guess I like this game of cat chess, but it just makes me think the kitty that you saw earlier, she is I call her the parkour kitty because there's
Mm-hmm.
one bookshelf that it's possible to get to the top of in this house, and she is the only cat that can get to the top of it, and she gets up there, she sits up there, and but you can't see around one corner, so I think it's only it's like half
Well,
cat
that's
chess.
also an excellent vantage point. So
Yes.
they win. She wins on points for that. It doesn't. She can't see all the cats from it, so that's a subtraction. But I think on the whole, she's winning. Our cats have discovered that we have sort of a gallery. When you go upstairs, there's an open pathway between the stairs and the bedroom, and there are rails, and the rails look down at either end onto bookshelves. And we discovered very early on when we moved here that the cats could get down through the rails onto the bookshelves. And we're always afraid that someday they're going to decide they can jump down from those bookshelves, which would be a really bad thing because they're very high.
Cats can do some amazing things, though. So we have a question here. What is
Sure.
the biggest trouble new authors have in their writing, and what can they do to fix it?
Description. That's one of the biggest things that new writers leave out is description. You have to set the scene when you are, especially when you're changing scenes or opening a new chapter or changing point of view. Every time you change scene, describe. Do not let the audience go for very long without knowing what your character looks like or where they are. Your narrative hook, which is the first part of your story, should set the readers in time and space. And that means showing them what's in your head. You know what it looks like, but you have to tell the reader that.
So so how do you, if I may,
Mm-hmm.
because I definitely think that's very good advice. I've also heard it said, though, as well, that can go too far in the other direction, where new writers are over telling, right? Where they literally
Yeah.
describe every single detail, and so what's a good way to like find balance between those two things?
One of the problems that you might see is if a new writer uh, has been over describing something or putting too much in, read it out loud. And if you run out of breath before you come to the end of your sentence, you have too many clauses in it. Go back and
That
see
is
if that there's
a good
something you
method.
don't need. In fact, reading out loud is a good way to see whether or not all of your characters sound alike. If they all sound like you, that's also a very young writer's mistake. Uh,
I to
they,
make
that
every
that you
character sound
can't
like
hear a
your
lot
own
of
self.
other voices in your head. Oh, I can see that I'm getting very pink. It's because it's very hot in here. Our air conditioning, as I said, went out. So forgive me for turning red. It's not because I'm blushing.
Well, I think that's really quite good advice. What other advice do you think you might give to new authors? And then I have a question, if I can ask a question, maybe about your work.
Sure. Let me answer the first question. One of the things that a lot of people tell me is that they would write something, but they don't have the time. You can make time. You can make 10 minutes anywhere. If you have a kitchen timer, say, this is my writing time, and set it for 15 minutes and just sit down and write. Just 15 minutes. That's not a very threatening length of time, or that you're going to fill one side of a piece of lined paper or one page on a computer. Just one. Break down the process so that it isn't so threatening and overwhelming as writing a whole book or a whole short story. You can do it in little bits and pieces. And if you write a page every day, by the end of the year, you'll have enough word count to actually put it together as a book. Because a page is about 250 words, and your average book is about 90,000 words. So 365 days, just about right. 91,000 words.
One bite at a time.
One tiny little bite at a time. Almost anybody can find a way to scrawl it. And if you can't figure out a way to start, pretend you're writing a letter to somebody about your idea. Dear Mom, I had this really crazy idea. It was about polar bear civilization and how they came to live up there instead of living in where it's decent. And before you know it, you'll be writing scenes and dialogue and coming up with your characters. And just write everything down until you have stopped coming up with your ideas. And then the next day, anticipate what you're going to do with that one page. And don't let it threaten you. No one ever has to see it if you don't want it.
That's true. You can always delete.
Or hide.
Or crumple it up and burn it in effigy as a method of powering a good magic spell for better writing next time.
I would hate to have somebody throw something away because they wrote it because they wanted to. They wrote it because they love it. David Gerald says that the first million words are just practice anyway. So keep it. Nothing is really ever wasted. If you wrote a really cool scene or a neat observation, you might find something to put it into later.
Do you know how many words you've written, or approximately how many words you've written throughout the course of your entire career?
Well,
speaking of a million words, like, how many is that even?
Well, if you multiply 50 books by, call it on average, maybe 100,000 words, you're
boy, that's.
And then the short stories, which I would say average about 5,000 words each. And I've written many other things besides. So I would have to just do it in sort of base mathematics like that.
Well, sure. I mean, obviously, you don't have the exact word count, but a rough estimate, 50,000. Sorry, that was 50,000 words times 100 books.
No, it's the other way around. It's 50 books times 100,000 words.
50 books times 100,000.
Yeah, 54, okay. I think. Yeah. So I honestly have lost count because on my bibliography, I also put the omnibuses, which contain 2-3 books, sometimes more. And I count those as books, but not books I've written because it's a compilation. So I have lost count.
So my question about your sci-fi stuff is, how do you approach sci-fi? Are you heavily technical, or do you do a little more glossing over? Which end of that spectrum do you fall on?
I've done it all. I have done all the way from rampant space opera, where the science is just more or less pasted on, although I am consistent throughout, all the way to hard science fiction. Travis Taylor, who actually is a rocket scientist, and I wrote a couple of young adult shorts novels, Moonbeam and Moon Tracks so far. And those, the science in them works. The only thing that is inaccurate is that it's set 80 years in the future when we have established our first colony on the moon. But there are no magic boxes. Everything has to be solved using actual science. So when you read about what we're talking about, of the problems of the ventilation, the problems that are many other things, you actually see solutions that we came up with using science. But my Lord Thomas Conago books, for example, the View from the Imperium, Fortunes of the Imperium, and Rhythm of the Imperium, I scramble science a little bit, but that's what the story is about, is being able to get back and forth without having everybody age 80 years while he's gone. So I am having fun with those. I really am.
Now, this is one of the books that we had in the banner was Mythfits. What is
Mhm.
Mythfits?
Robert Lynn Asprin, who is a dear friend of mine, one of my husband's best friends, started the Myth Adventures back in 1978. The first book came out from Dawning Starblaze Publications, which was a very small publishing house. And Bob's books were some of the very few that were ever published by them, but they became bestsellers. They are humorous fantasy. They are sort of the anti Eddings, the anti Tolkien, because instead of being
Mhm.
the story that was important because it had a magic object that had to be taken out of the world and that the whole world was at risk, this is the opposite. This is the Hope and Crosby buddy pictures of epic fantasy, where you have a couple of guys, one of whom is a little greedy, a little obnoxious, a little self-indulgent, and an apprentice magician who doesn't know what he's doing as his partner. They band together to keep from getting assassinated by a crazed wizard. They're looking out for imp assassins. The apprentice magician accidentally adopts a dragon, which is the one that you saw on the cover there. Bob wrote the first Bob wrote the first 12 books, and when he was finishing with those, we had written a book together which was called License Invoked, contemporary fantasy that was set in New Orleans with spies, magic, and rock and roll. And when we finished with it, he had such a good time that he wanted me to work on future myth adventures with him. So we wrote 6 together and a collection of short stories, and then we lost him. And I've written 2 books in that series since. That's the second one that you see there, and I'm working on a third right now.
Well, compliments, I guess, because we have at least one viewer who says they've read some of the myth books and they were hilarious. So that is excellent, and
Mm-hmm.
what a legacy there too.
Oh yeah.
So we are at 2:55, and we have a giveaway of one of your books. And
Mm-hmm.
what book will you be giving away this afternoon?
Well, I'm happy to give away a copy of Cats Triumphant to a person, an ebook or a paper book. They are coming. We had a couple of production problems, and they will be available soon, and then available on Amazon and other fine locales for you if you are not the lucky winner. But I'm happy to give a copy of Cats Triumphant with a wonderful cover by David Cherry, who is a fabulous artist. So
Yeah, it was
if
definitely
people
a
would like that.
really cool cover. So
Yeah.
that's the other cover that was in the banner here before we got started today on the show.
Mhm.
So for all of you out there watching, now is the time. Put your name in the comments, and I will add you to the wheel. This is my timer. The timer goes, and when the timer is done, I will then put all the names onto the wheel, and we will give a spin. If you are on our Patreon, you get an automatic entry, and in addition to everybody who comments here right now, which I already got some because I saw some of you were commenting during the course of the reading. So I have already added you to the wheel, and now is
Please tell me
now
if
is the
you
time
want.
for everyone else.
Please
Yes,
tell me if
if
you
you
want an ebook or a paper book,
yes, that
or
is
I can ask the
also
winner. I can ask the winner when the name is drawn.
yes. Okay, so I see you, Joshua, and I've got you. So I will add you to the list. Thank you. We always do a maximum of 2 entries. So for one for Patreon patrons, and then if they actually leave comments or whatever, they get the little extra bonus entry. So
Oh, I can donate 2
let's see.
books.
Uh, I've got Ivy and Philippe and Therese. Okay. And Carol says she must recuse herself because she already has the book.
Oh,
So
okay. Well, if you win,
if they
Carol, I'll give you something else.
I will add Carol's name just in case.
Okay, it's only fair.
And right? And Therese, Monique, Jack. Okay. Hmm. Okay, and I should say that our little wheel can only take a maximum of 50. So we're making a list. When I put these into the wheel, then the wheel will choose 50 random people from my list of more than 50, and then those will be the people that are getting in on the spin. That's how that works. And the timer is out. So I think I believe I've got everybody here.
We actually have
Yes.
50 people. That's fabulous.
Oh, more than 50.
Oh,
Yes.
wow. Hi, people.
Okay, I'm finding the wheel. Okay, and now we shall share the wheel with all of the names on it and do the drawing. Dun, dun, dun. Here it is, and go.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Isn't it fun? I love to spin the wheel. Sometimes though it takes much longer than other times. So I I don't know. We had to do a few drawings one time all in one session and not on a different segment on the channel. And so we were spinning the wheel multiple times and sometimes it would just come up right away and sometimes it was just going and going and going. And we're not sure what maybe it's
That
just
is.
the funky little tool, but it's fun.
Oh, I'm just enjoying watching it go round. That's cool. I see some
Almost
names I
there.
recognize.
I
Hi,
know.
gang.
Ooh, closer, closer.
I think it stopped.
It has
I
indeed.
love the I love the cheering crowd. That's funny.
I yes, they all pop up. So, Jimmy Chastain, you are the winner. Congratulations. You shall receive a copy in either ebook or in paperback of Cats Triumphant. I feel like I have to say that,
Mhm.
with exclamation. So,
Oh, absolutely.
well,
So
before
get
we
in touch with me.
bid one another, yes, I will collect his information for you and then send that along to you after the show. And do you have anything else you would like to say to your adoring fans?
Well, I'm delighted to have all of you come to listen to me. I really appreciate it. So, friend me on Facebook, and you can read my ongoing saga of my cats, who were, of course, kidnapped from the Pegasus sector. People who are my friends have been reading this saga since, oh my gosh, a year ago, December. And keep a lookout for things that I'm writing. I really appreciate it. And if you know a writer whose work you like, please review their works on Amazon or Goodreads because it does
Mm.
matter. It really helps all of us to have that. And if you don't like something, then don't tell us. We have enough against us anyway.
If you can't say anything nice, don't
Right.
say anything at all.
But come on by my page and jump in and ask me questions. I'm always happy to talk with people. And
That is
thank you very
fantastic,
much.
and I'm glad you. Yes, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. It was great today to have you. So, enjoy the rest of your Friday and also have a good weekend.
You too. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Bye bye, Jody.
Bye, y'all.